Welcome back, everybody. I'm Greg Horton.
And I'm Ryan Kitchen, and we are joined by Tamsen Taylor.
Listen, guys, postpartum depression, it affects like what, 1 in 7 women, Tamsen?
Postpartum depression?
Yeah.
Something like that.
And you're a woman who's experienced it yourself.
Absolutely. Yep.
So can you tell us, Tamsen, first off, thank you so much for coming. I know Tamsen said she wanted to start with a laugh, so she started with a giggle.
Yes, well, I deal with a lot of grief, and so yes, it's grief is not all about sadness. Grief is all emotions.
Right.
So can you,
Please.
Can you tell us, Tamsen, yeah, see, we'll make this easy for you.
Yeah, there's the laugh.
Can you tell us what brought you to here with your experience?
Sure. Well, I will thank Danielle Jaworski because she actually brought this to my attention, and I decided I wanted to come. I specialize in emotional health and community building. So you've already mentioned with previous guests how important relationships are for emotional health, and I run a Facebook group called Guelph Moms Supporting Moms, and I've really become aware in the last while of how important we are for each other's emotional well-being. I love helping moms. Even more than helping moms, I think it's the best way for me to help their children.
Yep.
So I love doing this work, and I do want to shout out to my Guelph Moms Supporting Moms members because I think I was telling you earlier, no community can be better than the members in it. So yay, go you!
Yeah,
go Guelph Moms!
Go Guelph Moms!
They are just awesome. They're so inspiring. They go out of their way to help each other, and they're very vulnerable when they come and ask for help. And I just want to acknowledge that. And I've learned so much from being the group organizer, and gotten such an opportunity to help as well as be helped. And I did want to come and just talk about the importance of community for feeling well, feeling whole, because we're taught that we should be able to do this on our own.
Right.
And I just don't think we can.
No, we can't. You know, we're social beings, aren't we?
Absolutely.
And without the power of our community and without the support of our community, we can see what can happen to people falling between the cracks, right?
Yeah, and I know previously people have talked about the importance of one-on-one relationships with people who've been there, who've gone through it. And getting and giving help on an individual basis is really important, but also you can do it at the level of a community where you go and you get help and you give help, and it may not be to the exact same person, but you know you can go there.
Yeah.
And we're talking about earning a sense of love and belonging, and that is, I think, how you do it. You can't just get handed a sense of love and belonging. When you go and you get help and you give help.
Right.
And it's foundational to our
I love what you
emotional
said
health,
right?
Right?
Earning a sense of belonging, because I think it's very important with mental health issues nowadays that we empower people and let them know that you can earn this experience. So what do you mean specifically by earning that?
What I see as a community versus a group. So my group has turned into a community. So it's not just a bunch of people together. We get help and we give help. And when you can get and give help within a group of people, then it's a community.
Right.
So and I do want to stress, I guess, when you're talking about people who are very, very vulnerable or not in a great place. When I had postpartum depression, my husband asked me, he was going to Subway, what sandwich did I want for dinner? I could not answer that question.
Right.
Like, you can be really low resources and not feel like you have anything to give.
Right.
But what I've seen time and time again is when people start to feel better, or they get a few months of motherhood under their belt, and they now can help other people. That is such a huge thing to help people feel better, to help instead of having the identity of someone who just is dependent, who needs help, who's in a really bad place. You start to become someone who can give help and help others.
Right.
And I find that even more emotionally valuable than getting help when you need it, and knowing people care is knowing that you are powerful enough to help other people and give them that feeling.
Absolutely. That really resonates, especially when you said like some people are feeling like they have nothing to give, but what they have is that story. And sharing that story, like you're sharing the story of moms supporting moms here, it gives other people hope. It gives somebody something to connect to, and that's something that we were talking about a little bit earlier, the power of connection. And I like how you touched on the difference between just a group of people and a community of people. Community has that give-get relationship and that give-take. whereas a group of people, it's everybody all in a mix mash. And so when we can get that kind of organization that you're talking about, it's huge outreach to people who are feeling like they don't have much to give. And on today, Blue Monday, we know that there's a lot of people who are feeling like that right now. Can you share any stories about your community and how it's been helpful?
I don't want to go into specific things for
okay.
privacy reasons.
Yeah.
One of the things that personally I have found from that, it's really helped me. I've had to learn a lot. I've been challenged a lot. I've had to learn a lot about myself in leading a group and standing for. One of the main things I stand for is respect in my group. We talked about having controversial conversations. As long as you can do it with respect, it's a beautiful, beautiful connecting thing. I've had to step up and be part of conversations in a respectful way, just to say, maybe you shouldn't call each other names and stuff like that. One of the things I think that I learned very profoundly was that effect of giving help and how important that is. And we've had some really, really interesting conversations, and I also learned that I need to ask my group members stuff.
Yes.
We've had conversations about who belongs in the group and who doesn't. We've had conversations, we're talking about vaccines. We've had all sorts of conversations that people find difficult to have. And it's so important to have those conversations. And it's so important. My main role now isn't starting the conversations, it's making sure they happen in a way that's helpful.
Right.
So.
Is it limited to moms in Guelph?
We limit it to, and this came about because of a discussion, people who identify as mothers, however you became a mother.
Okay.
And we limit it to Guelph and relatively close by, because a lot of the resources we provide, things like services, events, things like that. So it's nowhere near an international group. But I would say for anyone out there who's watching, I did want to make an invitation. I'm kind of maxed out as to how many communities I can run.
Yeah.
But they're so important that if you go to my TamsenConnects.com website, you can get in touch with me a bunch of different ways. I would love to connect with anyone else who is thinking maybe about starting a community, who'd like to learn more about why community is important, or people who've started a community and it's not kind of going the way they want. I would love to be able to help, because it is such an important thing.
I was thinking that as you were talking, because I think, it's so important when we see something that is helpful for people. You can, you don't have to, you can duplicate that. You can connect with Tamsen. You can talk to Tamsen and ask her what's been working. You can start something in Brantford. You can start something in Hamilton, Toronto, wherever, and kind of follow the formula of what's working. So I'm really glad you said that.
And I think as an emotional educator, I think it's a really important thing to realize that in almost any case, no matter what a group is technically for, people need emotional support.
Absolutely.
Like if people are, there are all kinds of groups on Facebook, for example, for tech support for various things, or to build your business
for
or whatever.
everything, yeah.
But people are coming because they're struggling.
Absolutely.
And that comes with emotional implications. And so to understand the importance of that and being able to support your members, and a lot of people are afraid of that.
Yes.
So emphasizing that, if people are wanting to learn more about that, I'd love to talk to them.
Beating the stigma it's very difficult, very difficult. And earlier we were talking about where we are in mental health and what, as a community, and what we can do to kind of get us up to our maximum potential. And I work in developmental services, and one of the things that's a big part of our history is the grassroots efforts by parents and by communities trying to get programs and trying to get support available for people that have a hard time getting access to it. And one of the ways that many communities are offering support is through grassroots efforts. And they're in your community, they're everywhere. It's just that people need to find access to them, and we need to have these difficult conversations, as you say, so we can beat the stigma that's around them too, and let people know that this is a really organic situation that you're stepping into. Other people who understand, an empathetic conversation, even if there's a disagreement. We're coming up to the end of our segment. I can't believe it already. Isn't that crazy?
Flew by.
Yeah.
Sure did.
But is there any other like really important messages that you can get across to people that are having a tough day on Blue Monday? I know that there's moms out there, Jess, I'm talking to you, that could really use your support and really, or just hear your positive messages.
Okay.
Is there something for them you can share?
I would like to say, I call myself an emotional educator. I take an educational approach to emotional health. I totally know there's stigma out there, but what I love about that approach is just we need better information. We're not taught how to deal with emotions in a healthy way. We're taught to ignore them, we're taught to push them away, numb them out. We're only supposed to be happy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be something that you need like 10 years of therapy to get over. Sometimes you just need a little better information. And for anyone who's interested in looking more into that, I'm trained in the grief recovery method by the Grief Recovery Institute out of the US. You can go on to Amazon or wherever you buy books, get the Purple Handbook. It can teach you so much about how to be healthy in an emotional way, and you're not broken.
Absolutely.
Okay?
Thanks so much for joining us today. You've been a joy. Your big bright smile is just flashing all over the TV right now. Everybody's loving this.
Thanks.
Ryan, we got some more hosts coming up, and some new guests too.
Yeah, we do. So we have Aidan Grummett, and he's going to talk about how hockey helps the homeless. Thank you, Tamsen, for coming.
Thank you so much, Tamsen.
Thank you very
this has been
much.
awesome.
Thanks for kicking back with us today. I'm Aidan Grummett. I'm joined by Elizabeth Clark, Craig Herner, and Jackie Terry Carroll. They're here to talk about hockey helps with the homeless and some shelters that are in the KW area. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Craig, tell us a little bit about Hockey Helps the Homeless and how it came to be.
Well, basically, Hockey Helps the Homeless, it's a national charity. It was started over 20 years ago in Toronto by some gentlemen, and over expansion through the years, it is now in 12 different cities across the country, as well as 4 universities and colleges. So basically, it's a one-day tournament that gets held, and all the money that gets raised stays in each of the communities.
That's fantastic. So what goes on at the tournament?
So basically, we have 16 teams in our tournament, and they fundraise, throughout the months that leading up to the tournament. Mm-hmm. Then the day of the event is a fun day for them because they get to play 3 hockey games. Each team gets an ex-NHL or a Olympian player put on their team for the day, and so it's a lot of fun. That we have breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and a dinner reception where we have a speaker from one of the agencies that we support as well.
That's awesome. So the agencies that are supported, in what ways are they supported?
Basically, it's from the money that we raise during the tournament, as well as just awareness. We do a lot of social media, a lot of marketing to promote our tournament, which also helps the agencies as well. So the 4 agencies that we support are the House of Friendship, the YW Kitchener-Waterloo, Lutherwood, along with One Roof Youth Services.
That's fantastic. So Elizabeth, can you tell us a little bit about YW?
Sure. Well, as Craig's mentioned, we're one of 4 shelters that's supported by Hockey Helps the Homeless, and that's 4 shelters in Kitchener-Waterloo. Our shelter is for homeless women and children and families. We do serve some homeless youth as well, but for the most part, we're women and children. We served about 400 women last year and about 200 children in our shelter. Altogether in the region, there were about 1,800 men and women and children and youth that used their shelter system last year. So the need is very, very great.
Yeah.
We had about 80,000 overnight stays, bed nights we call them, in the shelters. But we also had about 20,000 in motels because the shelters were all full and overflowing.
Wow.
And that's a situation that's really persisted for the last couple of years now. And one of the reasons why Hockey Helps Homeless is so important to us.
So what types of people may be seeking a shelter?
Well, that's, as you've just heard, anybody from a newborn to an 80-year-old uses shelters. The one thing that all people who use the shelters have in common is that they are temporarily homeless. Well, in some cases they're chronically homeless, but that's the one thing they have in common. I think we tend to imagine that it's largely for economic reasons that people become homeless. And that is always a factor. Poverty is an underlying factor for sure. But what we're seeing increasingly, and particularly in the last couple of years, is more significant mental health problems and more significant addictions problems. We're really seeing since the last 10 or 12 years, the percentage of people in the shelters who are dealing with concurrent disorders has gone from about a quarter of the population in the shelters to closer to 3/4 of the population.
Wow.
So it's very significant.
Very significant. So the shelters, do they operate year-round, Monday to Friday, or every day of the week? Or?
Yep. All 4 of the shelters that are supported by Hockey Helps the Homeless are permanent shelters operating year-round. They operate 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Most of the shelters do close for a few hours during the day, and the idea behind that is so that the people using the shelters will be able to make use of services in the community around helping them to find housing. Because of some of the reasons that we just discussed, and also because of the shortage of housing, that's something that we're looking at and wondering if that's a realistic goal anymore. One of the things that should be mentioned is that for the past several years, we've also had temporary shelters that have operated overnights during the winter time just to deal with some of the overflow numbers that we've had. That's in addition to the motels.
Wow. Jackie, tell us a little bit about your roles.
So Lutherwood operates Safe Haven Youth Services, which is a 10-bed service that provides beds for kids who are between the ages of 12 up until their 18th birthday. We work a lot in the area of prevention. So kids who come through our services are not only given just a bed, we're really looking at, if possible, reconciling with their families. If that's not possible, finding out what the next option is for them to move into housing in the community. And then further to that, making sure that they have emotional management and relationship building skills, conflict management skills. Some of the things that are really important in, it seems kind of silly, but in maintaining your housing, maintaining those relationships so that you can actually stay in your home.
That's awesome. And you had a special story to share with us as well.
Yeah, so I met an amazing young woman called Chantal who actually came through Safe Haven Youth Services, and she had a really tough story. Her family was a newcomer family, and she was struggling with mental health from an early age, but they didn't recognize it, and in fact they didn't actually have language for it in their home language. And so when she was about 17 years old, she actually got thrown out of home. It was actually just after her 17th birthday, and she came to us, she came to Safe Haven. She'd actually been couch surfing with friends for a number of months before she came to the shelter, and was really terrified, scared about coming. You know, it's a scary sounding
definitely.
place, but she knew she needed help to find her way forward. And so during her time at Safe Haven, she was able to transfer to another school, an alternative school that helped support her mental health. The staff at Safe Haven were able to help her connect with mental health supports in the community so that she was actually getting the support that she needed to get better. They did attempt some reconciliation with the family. I don't believe that went very well. But throughout her time coming through Safe Haven, she was able to, in her words, she says she found who she was. She was able to grow into the person that she wants to become, to the point that she's actually at Fanshawe College now because she wants to be a child and youth worker so that she can help other youth who struggled like she did.
That's fantastic. I think it's really important when people find kind of their roles and build mastery in what they have experienced and are able to help other people. Craig, it must be really special for you when you hear that the Hockey Helps the Homeless is able to help people like that story.
Oh, definitely, yeah. Just at our reception each year, we have a speaker from one of the agencies, and just hearing the stories, it's real heartwarming, for sure.
That's fantastic. So are people able to attend the Hockey Helps the Homeless, or is it only for the people playing in the game?
No, people can come and watch the games for free. It's no problem. Our tournament's usually the last Friday of every October, so yeah, people can come out and enjoy, meet some of the hockey players too, yeah.
That's really cool. Which hockey players are involved?
Oh, we've had a lot of returnees each year, like Gary Lehman, George Larocque, Gilbert Dion, Glenn Anderson actually for a couple years, so yeah, it's been really good.
That's very cool.
George Larocque is a vegetarian.
Really?
Yes. I know that because I've served him dinner.
What did he eat for dinner?
He ate an enormous bacon plate. He's a huge guy, and the two things just seemed interesting to me.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thanks for kicking back with us.
No problem.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey guys, welcome back to Kickback. We all know how good it is to, or how good it feels to laugh.
Yeah, I do. I do it all the time, man. But sometimes people don't normally think of laughing when it comes to yoga, do they? Like, so
we are joined by Amanda Gazzola, and Amanda is going to talk about laughter yoga. So what is laughter all about?
So laughter yoga is pretty much what it is. It's laughing, and then the yoga part of it is because laughing really does something with the breathing. You start breathing a lot more deeper, and it does more of that diaphragmic and gets in there. So they put laughing and yoga because laughter is the best medicine, and yoga about the breathing, and then boom, there you have it.
That really makes sense. You know, before we were just before we came back to the show here, we were talking about the health benefits of laughing, and how this is something, as you say, laughter is the best medicine. And we've seen great movies about like Patch Adams, things like that.
Yeah.
But sometimes we don't think about going to our local yoga studio or going to our local yoga instructor and talking about that.
Can you talk, Amanda, can you just tell us about your introduction to laughter yoga and then kind of what you got you involved with it?
Of course. So I was at a networking party or a networking community event one evening, and they have some headliners that come in that talk about what their expertise are. And one of them happened to be, her name was Catherine Kimmins. She's like talked about laughter yoga, and I was just like, oh my goodness, there's another fad thing that's out there. This is dumb. Like, that was my judgment, 100%. But there was something intriguing about this woman. She had this beautiful, like, vibrant outfit with this like fedora hat and this big smile. So she was very captivating, and she had so much elegance to her. Anyways, but what she started to do, we start off pretty slowly, which I'm going to be taking you guys through a little bit of exercises in a little bit. But we started doing some of this exercises, but there was one thing, it was contagious. At first you kind of feel silly, but that's the benefit of, like, if you're a professional or if you're someone that's struggling, this starts tapping you out of like your comfort zone a little bit, but you start like laughing because it feels silly and you're like, oh my goodness, but then when you look at someone in the eye, then you start laughing. And then the laughing really continues and gets a lot more heartier and whatnot. That energy lasted me the whole evening, where I had trouble falling asleep because it really just did something to my internally, where I just was like, there's something to this. Like, this is not a joke. This is actually really legit. And I found out a lot more about it. Started using it in a lot of my community events, or if I'm hired as an energy host, I will use this, and everyone loves it. That's the best part of their, like, what they'll remember is whatnot. So there was something to be said where I was like, I wanted to look into this and get certified as an instructor, because it's something that we all have in our back pocket at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Sometimes dealing with things with a sense of humor can really help us tolerate what's going on. And, you know, I'm sure you see it with your clients, where somebody's going through something and they participate in laughing yoga. And at the end, they might still be, in fact, they're definitely still going through what they were going through. But now that their mood has improved, it's easier to digest that stuff, isn't it?
120%. And I just want to tell about a story that was in like our certified manual. There was a gentleman by the name of Norman Cousins, and he had severe pain. I don't know how to pronounce it, but it was basically severe arthritis that felt like his joints were ripping out of his body. Like, so he was under a lot of medication and whatnot, but he had trouble sleeping, and he just needed to do something. So he started looking at tangible tools, and he started learning about stress. They called it a noxious agent back in the day or something, but then they made the word stress out of it. So he started doing some stuff, and he saw a lot of benefits of laughter. He started laughing, and within a couple days, the pain stopped, because he basically hired people to, like, you know, find out books, tell him jokes, watch movies, anything that can get him laughing. And then because you're moving the toxins around your body, you're starting to breathe a lot differently. You're not holding on to the pain anymore because you're laughing and you're not thinking about it. So he didn't, like, not saying like he was super cured, but he had no pain for 2 hours.
Wow.
And then he'd sleep.
Yeah.
And so he basically would have to start the cycle again.
Yeah.
That's the thing. You can't just stop after once. It's something you have to continuously do.
For anybody out there going through chronic pain, you know that taking that second away from it, it's like a major vacation. For people dealing with chronic pain, I deal with chronic pain myself, and I know when I can find those opportunities and identify the opportunities where I can have that relief, again, it gives you another tool in your toolbox for how to be able to cope with that stuff. You have the truth of the pain, but you also have the truth that you can deal with it, and that's very empowering for a lot of people, I find.
That's a big word. That, like, it's very empowering to know that you have a tool that's right there that you can resource, but that it is identifying it and whatnot. Like, especially for you, identifying that you have this chronic pain, but you're learning how to deal with it and not getting stuck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what happens to so many people. They get stuck, right?
I'm dying to know about the energy hosting.
Oh,
Because it sounds amazing. I love speaking. I love, like, the motivational. Can you tell me about the energy hosting?
Yeah, so basically a lot of people, because as a business professional, as we all are, you go to a lot of events and you sit there the whole time, and, you know, everything kind of just starts blending in together. So they need to pick up the energy at the beginning or during mid-event, just to kind of get people moving their body again, because kinesthetic learning is kind of where it's at. When you're learning so much that day, you get tired. Like, by the end, your brain's full. So what they like to do, and like even Tony Robbins does it as well, is that they want to, like, shake it up and change it so that they can move the body. So people will hire me to basically do certain exercises, do laughing yoga, because then it gets them ready for the next part of the event again.
Absolutely.
Should the kickback host crew be worried about their jobs?
No. I'm all about partnerships and working together. No, not at all.
Let the record show that I made someone laugh during my 2 hours today.
One thing that I found really interesting about just our conversation beforehand here was we were talking with concern about people who are feeling numb from their from depression or from trauma, and that what laughing does is really break that open. Can you expand on that a little?
Yeah. So because we all come from some place where we've been there. I deal with depression as well, but I have a lot of tools in my toolbox that I will go and back, because it's so easy to stay stuck, but how do you get unstuck? Back in the day, I would just, like, you know, because I just did not know how to deal with my emotions, and all I needed to do was let it out, and I would just, like, hold on to my steering wheel if I was driving the car and just scream at the top of my lungs, because I just needed to get it out of myself. So that was a way that I definitely numbed myself, but so many people don't know how to process or what they're dealing with. And when you're dealing with other energies, you don't, like, know sometimes if it's yours or someone else's. So you get mixed up in whatever's happening, and you can just take it in. As an empath that I learned that I was eventually, I realized that I definitely took on a lot of other people's emotions, but it's because I love to do stuff and help them fix and whatnot, but I never knew how to let it out when I would have their stuff in there. So being a lot more aware, identifying the tools that are, identifying the resources of where things coming from, the environments you're spending your time in. It's really good to, you know, because you guys are doing something so amazing today, where people are going to learn so many various tools today about how to get unstuck. This is just one of them. And I know that numbing, like, you know, it can really be heavy listening to something like this all day. So this is, like, you know, start processing and understanding and identifying where things are coming from, and you'll know how to get unstuck.
in the spirit of that, you said you wanted to take us through an exercise, and we're down to a couple minutes left. Do you want to do that, Amanda?
Yeah.
I know this is what you're most excited about. So.
Well, because like it's getting people out of their comfort zone.
Yeah.
Because laughing out of nowhere. Oh, and this is really important. Laughing out of nowhere can be really hard. We all tend to like be really judgy, like I was. But the body doesn't know the difference between a real laugh and a fake laugh. So yeah, you can fake it until you make it and whatnot. But the thing is, like, it's still like, you know, if you do a hearty laugh for like a minute, 2 minutes, it's like being 10 minutes on a treadmill. So there's a lot to be said where you're getting some good exercise in, and you're working your lungs, working your cardiovascular system, working your immune system, working through the stress, like everything like that. So definitely would love to take you guys through. So the first one we're going to do is it just involves, I prefer everyone to stand up at the end of the day, but because we're tied down to our microphones today, what we were just going to do, we're just going to sit here, but I'm just going to do a couple exercises. So the first one is going to be ho, ho, ha, ha, ha. But as we do it, we're going ho, ho, ha, ha, ha. And why it's so important to clap is because you're hitting a lot of acupuncture points in your fingers, you're hitting the meridians and the nerve points. So stuff is triggering through the body, and it's kinesthetic learning. It's feeling good. So everything is kind of just, you know, blending medicinally well there.
Okay, we got about a minute left.
Okay, so first one, ho, we're going to do 10 times, and we're going to go faster. Ho, ho, ha, ha, ha. 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 3 more. Ho, ho, ha, ha, ha. Ho, ho, ha, ha, ha. Ho, ho, ha, ha, ha. How do you feel? Do you feel like you're tingly a little bit?
Up the arms. I feel it in my chest.
It's
That's a great one. Yes, 100%. So you can just see that like things are happening in the body. The next one that I want to do is do you remember the Woody Woodpecker? Because if you're by yourself, like just like tap into that childlike.
Amanda, I am so sorry.
No.
I know.
It is basically.
Amanda, you made us laugh. Okay,
you can. Woodpecker, okay, guys? So you guys got that in your
Okay,
back
how about
pocket.
we do this? Amanda's going to do it, and she's going to take us, and then it's going to take us into break.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Amanda.
Basically, let's just do it together. Woody Woodpecker, we all know it. We grew up with it. Ha 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 ha.
Thanks so much for
You're
joining us.
welcome.
We're all laughing as promised. So.
We're now joined by Marc Laferriere. Thank you so much for joining us. Kickback, this is fantastic. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you. This is my second or third time appearing on Kickback, so happy to help out.
Well, we really appreciate it. My name is Ben.
I mean,
and we're going to be talking with you about PTSD.
Yeah,
And you've
absolutely.
brought a couple books along with you.
Yeah. So myself and a colleague of mine from Mohawk College, Stephanie Milakne, former police sergeant, we co-wrote Mental Health Awareness, Practical Skills for First Responders, and Mental Health Awareness, Self-Care for First Responders through Emon Publishing, emon.ca/mental health if anybody's interested. And one book deals with how to be in the justice and helping fields and work with increasing mental health service calls. And then the other is about your own mental health if you're a police officer, a social worker, a hospital worker, anybody frontline.
Awesome.
What mental illnesses are we typically seeing with first responders?
So you see the gamut, but it depends. Some of it, the severity sometimes depends on the profession. One thing people don't realize that is pretty interesting is that correctional workers actually have some of the highest outcomes in terms of mental health issues and things that impede the quality of life, like divorce rates, cancer rates, depression rates, suicide rates. And they were only just recently put into the category of first responders, which is pretty shocking, right? So emergency responders like police, fire, ambulance workers, they were all grouped together. And in Ontario anyway, correctional workers just recently got put into that category so that they can claim things like having PTSD and claim it as likely from occupation as opposed to other professions.
Right, and now what exactly is PTSD?
So PTSD stands for post-traumatic stress disorder, and there's been some sort of permutation on how we use the language.
Right.
More recently, we might say things like a stress injury or an occupational stress injury, an acute stress injury, that sort of thing. And post-traumatic stress disorder, essentially, it's kind of in the name, right? After some traumatic event, you may have a disorder or an injury, depending on how you look at it. But this can happen across the board. So For some folks, they might get into a car accident.
Right.
And trauma is defined, and this is the thing, we say we misuse language so much in our society because we say things like, oh, I'm so depressed, my favorite pizza place closed down. No, you're not. Depression has to be 2 weeks or longer, has to be from, impeding in your life. It's not just normal sadness. It's also not when, a loved one passes away and you're feeling grief, because that is part of normal living. We say things like, oh, I'm so anxious about this test I have. Well, no, anxiety is actually a different thing, and it can be very debilitating for some people. It can be life impeding for others. But anxiety isn't the same as nervousness, right? And we use these terms. Same thing with trauma, right? We'll say things like, oh, it was so traumatic the way, something happened. And unless it's something that actually caused death or the threat of death or serious bodily harm and injury, then it's not traumatic. So if I bomb this interview, that's not traumatic. Right, it's disappointing. It's sorry, I gotta let you guys down, but that's not trauma. Right? Trauma has to be if these lights above fell and almost hit me or hurt my leg, or let's knock on all the wood we can find. But where my life was actually in danger, or I saw somebody else's life be in danger, especially a loved one. That's trauma. So when a young kid, a 5-year-old, sees their mom being beaten by their dad, or their dad being beaten by their mom or their partner, that is traumatic, because you're seeing a loved one going through something that to you is very big and could be life-threatening, and in actuality could be. When you get into a car accident and almost die, right, that's traumatic. And also when you're a frontline person, you can have the vicarious trauma of hearing the stories or seeing somebody hurt themselves a lot and things like that, having to intervene, that stress of it, absolutely, because you are in a position where you might have some bodily harm. And this is where we get back to correctional workers, right? Correctional workers have this all the time because the environment there is very dangerous as well. I'll go tour, my job as a college professor teaching justice studies, I'll go tour correctional facilities with ex-police officers who keep going for their gun because they're and they'll say to me, I couldn't work here, right? Because in policing, you have these high stress, traumatic events that happen, but you also have some time where you're just driving, or you're doing paperwork, or you're relatively safe, as opposed to in a correctional situation where anything can turn at any moment, right?
So and I know in the handbook is meant for first responders to be able to bring that with them and keep with them, to be able to work and constantly go back to, right? So as a teacher working with students that want to go on and become first responders, what are some of the things that they get taught to be able to deal with that?
So one of the things we purposely did when designing this, it wasn't just about the writing of it was the designing of it, and we wanted it to be something that could be put in your gear bag, on your person if you needed to, if you're a social worker, in the little desk. We wanted it to be something that's portable and also personalizable, so that people can do things like an activity log, a sleep log, caffeine log, all the things that might also exacerbate your PTSD or your emotional injury. So that was really important to have it be small and affordable. And what we also did was, while we're using it for students and we're using it for curriculum, and it's being used, I think, in 8 different colleges and 2 universities.
Awesome,
yeah, but we designed it for the professional, right? We're not teaching students how to be students. We're giving them the same thing that we've given, and we've done trainings now, and this has been purchased by school boards, police services, emergency services, fire departments, and frontline social work services. So we're teaching them the same thing. So we're teaching them as though they're already in those fields, and some of our students are, right?
That's fantastic.
They may be at residential homes. They might be working at like a Rosewood House in Brantford, or doing their co-op there. They might be security personnel, and they're dealing with people who are, in the throes of mental health issues. So we're trying to base this on that reality, because as we've cut services, especially mental health services, and as things have become less affordable and all these other things exacerbate mental health problems, it's the frontline responders that are having to go in more, spending more frontline minutes dealing with mental health. Police in a lot of different jurisdictions are dealing with more mental health calls than they are severe crime calls, right?
Yeah. What does PTSD look like? Is it the same across the board?
No. It can be very personalizable for the individual. For some people, it's almost like an absolute shock reaction. For other people, it may be low level and they maintain in public, but when they go home, they feel that sort of slipping away, or that inability to cope. right? For other people, it's funny because when you see a movie about having somebody having a PTSD reaction, you'll see it presented in different ways, because in real life it's different things for different people. For some people, it's this feeling of crippling anxiety before they go back into a car to go on the road to where they recently had an accident or a near accident. For other people, the thing you see in movies, right, is the car backfires and the person who is a military service personnel, they think they're back in Afghanistan or wherever.
It was like a gunshot.
For other folks, it could be going to shop and the alarms go off, but the alarm sounds like an alarm that they were used to when something traumatic happened. But for other people, young people, people who've survived sexual abuse, for example, it can be a lot of things. It could be you were sexually abused, and I went to a conference where somebody brought this up as an example. Banana bread was being made at his home when he returned after being sexually abused by this person, a priest. And now whenever he smells banana bread, he has to emotionally check in and deal with it and deal with those feelings. Right. So it could be, the shutting down can be extreme silence, it could be extreme emotionality, or it could be somebody co-opting their life to try and protect themselves and staying in, right? There could be a lot of different things. Or it could be risky behaviors, right? That feeling of entanglement with death and dangerous things, and then you start doing dangerous things. Often it presents itself too as addiction in one form or another.
Right. So what are ways of treatments that are used for PTSD? So
there are a lot. One of the ones I recommend, and we have to get over this idea that going to see a professional is somehow admitting you're weak or somehow, I'm a social worker, my wife's a social worker, she's in private practice, and we both have seen thousands of clients. We have to get over this idea that should be like the last option, or I'm only going to use that service if I really, really absolutely need it. Well, you don't know when you're going to absolutely need it. You can use it to prevent as well. And so that's the first thing. In treatment with somebody, a lot of times when I was working with people who were living with post-traumatic stress, I might do a method where it's called exposure therapy. And how that works is, for example, if a young person was severely beaten by their parents, and now when they were 5 or 6, and now they're 10 or 11, and there was an item, a cup, right? And the cup they were used to hit them, and they get anxious around cups. They get nervous. They might cry and leave the room when they see the same type of cup. It may be something where we talk about that stimuli that creates that reaction, and then we bring it into the room, but not at the end of a table somewhere.
Right.
And then maybe the next session we have it at the table. Maybe the next session they're holding it and talking about it. And you're sort of dealing with the emotional arousal that the person has because of this traumatic item that they associate with their abuse, and demystifying it a little bit, making it letting the person see that, like, oh, I'm touching this cup that's similar to the one that used to be used to hurt me, and it's not going to hurt me, and I'm strong. And if somebody who's been in a car accident, a session might literally be, we might actually have a session in the parking lot near a car. And then we might have a session in a car. Then we might have a session where I'm driving. Then we might have a session where they're driving. Then we might have a session where they're driving and they drive with me past or near the place where they had their accident, right? And then we debrief, and then and the person has some time to kind of come to grips with that stimuli that reminds them of what happened, and that's a really often a very effective way. There's other ways too. Group therapy can work, but you have to be very careful. In group situations, especially when you have first responders mixed in with the general population, it can be a very difficult group to manage. There's something now called first responder specific care, where first responders are actually doing group care together, and civilians are doing their own. Because if you're somebody who you were in a car accident or almost in a car accident, and it really traumatized you, and that's nobody should demean that in any way, because it can be, but it may create a situation in a group therapy situation where then a police officer comes and they're talking about the 8 times they went into a car accident scene, and it was death, and it was graphic, and it was brutal, and then they feel disconnected from the person. The person who's a civilian who just was in a regular car accident feels like they can't relate, or they're re-traumatized. So we found that putting fire, corrections, police, EMS together, they kind of understand each other's point of view, and it creates a better discussion. It's happening in Ontario, which is really great.
Awesome. And so if somebody is currently either they have a family member or them personally dealing with PTSD, where can they search these things out?
So one of the best places to look is in Ontario is 211, which you can call, or I believe the website's ontario211.ca, and you can actually look at in any jurisdiction you're in what specific resources are there for you. In Ontario, though, when it comes to first responders, there are some like Homewood and other places where they're actually offering first responder specific care. Here in this area, a St. Leonard's type mental health organization, CMHA, they all do offer some services, but your mileage may vary depending on where you live.
Right.
And again, there's private practice options if you have benefits or can afford it. But it's really important, honestly, start with the web search, right? Get that under your belt and see what's in your community, or use Ontario 211.
Right. So the first chapter of your handbook is on well-being. What are some of the preventative measures that people can take to prevent PTSD?
So if you've had an incident, especially an acute stress incident, something where you're affected by it or you may be affected by it, sometimes with these incidents you don't feel the effect until later. I was always one of this person when I worked frontline. If I was involved in a containment where you had to go physically intervene, or a suicide issue where you're intervening so somebody doesn't complete suicide, sometimes I wouldn't feel the effect for 2-3 days later. Right, so a couple things you can do is you can debrief, right? But you have to have a good self-care plan. You have to be able to understand that self-care isn't just something that you do when you've had a rough shift or a rough day or an acute stress incident. Like, use this example. If I've ever been in an almost car accident, I'm fine. And then when I park, that's when I start getting the sweats and I'm going, oh my, what happened? And that can happen with these incidents as well. So it's really important to monitor your alcohol consumption, your caffeine, your lifestyle, your sleep, but also to talk about it within 24 hours of the incident occurring, and to have parts of your life that aren't connected to that trauma. So if you're in a home where there's a lot of trauma happening, to have some healthy, positive things that are happening outside of that home. If you're in a workplace where you're coming up and butting up against trauma, to have parts of your life that aren't involved with that. And it could be physical, it could be mental, it could be spiritual. That's really up to you. But don't do something you don't like because you think it's going to be helpful, right? One of the things I do with a lot of my students is we go through a list of over 100 different self-care activities, and I ask them to tell me ones that they have tried and liked, ones that they will never try, because it's important to know what you don't want to do. So somebody will be like, I don't want to write poetry, that's not me. Person next to them will go, oh, poetry, that actually helps me. Great, you're different people. You don't, if yoga's not for you, it doesn't have to be for you. But if it is, great. But really know yourself and don't do something that isn't helpful. Also, don't rely on unhealthy things to try and make you a healthy person, right? Like alcohol consumption, drug use. That might make you feel better in the moment, but it's not going to make you, it's going to compound your problems as you self-medicate. So it's really important to have self-care plans beforehand, and if they stop working, to try something else. There are people who love fishing until they don't.
Yeah.
Right? Or if you love fishing, but then you're in a boating accident, it might not be the right self-care for you anymore for a while. So what is that for you? For me, I love reading comic books. I read comic books every night, and that's a disconnect. It just keeps me, brings me back to my youth. It's my stories, like my grandma used to have, with her soap operas, and it's just something that it's completely disconnected from my day-to-day. So that's really important. Your well-being is important, and also, again, seek treatment even if things aren't necessarily completely off and completely wrong. Just check in, like you would a checkup about your physical health. So many of the things we do for our physical health, if we did a version of that for our mental health, we would do a lot better.
Absolutely.
Would that be kind of like finding your benchmark, more or less?
Yeah, it could be finding your benchmark. It could just be a part of your health routine, If people are interested in their physical health and they use the same principles around something you have regimented, something that you're able to do wherever you are, whether you're traveling, whether you're at home, we do all the same practical things for our physical health. If we're focused on that, we should do the same for our mental health. You were asking earlier about what to do if you're a partner of somebody, right. and that's part of it too, is let the person have their self-care, whatever that might be, right? Sometimes it is, wing night with the guys, right? Sometimes it is yoga, sometimes it is something out of the house, sometimes it's something in the house, sometimes it's it's an hour of quiet time or tinkering in the garage, whatever it might be. The other thing people can do to support people they think might have be dealing with this sort of occupational or other stress injuries is to become more educated themselves. So there's mental health first aid programs. I used to be an instructor in mental health first aid, just like physical first aid, but about mental health. It gives you a lot of information. And there's also groups, for example, there's something called CAN Praxis. If you're a military spouse, you and your spouse can both join in the sort of almost like couples or family therapy related to the stress incident. Right? So lots of options out there.
Right, and earlier we were talking about misused words. And in the last little bit, I heard you mention complete suicide and not commit.
Yeah. So I use that as sort of a best practice. We don't commit suicide because it's not a crime. It hasn't been for a long time. It's also a silly crime to try and prosecute. So we try to get some of that stigmatizing language off the table. People don't. If somebody says, somebody committed suicide, I don't rally at them, and but I might try to find a way to bring it up because I've lost clients to suicide, right? I don't think they committed an act. I think they completed something that it's hard and it's difficult to process, and it's made more difficult by calling it something that you would a crime, right? As opposed to a decision they made under the circumstances they were in and how they were feeling, and looking at it in a more sort of broader point of view. But it's really important that we try to be more thoughtful about our language. I brought this up earlier about how we use anxiety, and OCD is another example. Right. We're like, oh, it's my OCD. It's like, well, actually, OCD can be really debilitating, and it really demeans the person who actually has it from being able to talk about it more openly if they actually have a diagnosis. And there's a practical reason for using better language as well. Imagine you are a frontline person working in a shelter or a residence for young people, and you are now working with the hospital because your client at the residence they were threatening to hurt themselves, right? And you say to the intake nurse, yeah, well, they've been really depressed lately, and they might think that means an actual diagnosed 2 weeks or more, it's intervening with their quality of life, and you might actually just meant, well, this weekend because they had a home visit and it didn't go well, or there was an incident and they're sad, and now they take it as part of the sort of diagnosis talk, and now they could be apprehended or put in the mental health ward when that might not actually be the right intervention. It might actually traumatize them more. So it's really important to use the proper language if you're working in any of the helping fields or the related fields. Right, not get it confused.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah, definitely. I know that's something that you're always speaking to, and it's been a part of my journey, just learning more about.
Yeah,
this
I think
field.
that's kind of how Kickback all came to be, was a conversation around mental health terminology and how it's kind of always evolving.
It is. I mean, in our house, my daughter's 3, and we try not to use the word crazy, right? Especially when we mean it as oh, that was wild. We actually, my daughter will correct people and go, oh, you mean wild, right? Like she'll tell family members, like, you mean wild. We don't say crazy. Yeah. Because crazy is stigmatizing language. And when you mean it as like, oh, you're making me crazy, well, that's actually not really helpful, especially if people are dealing with serious or medium mental health issues. No, it's we try to find other words and better words. Right. Something too I want to touch on, because I know I've been talking a lot about incidents and an incident happening, but you can also develop post-traumatic stress disorder or one of these injuries based on cumulative stress, right? And this is, if anybody's, you have the grind of whatever your grind is, whether it's work or family or some situation you're in, debt, whatever it might be. Sometimes the stress over a long period of time can create the same reactions, and you don't necessarily need some acute thing to happen. You could just be at the end of your rope because of again, I like to make this like physical. If you're driving 8 hours a day and you aren't taking care of yourself and you aren't doing the right things to get up and stretch and keep your body healthy, cumulatively over a period of time, your back and your knees and your neck and your shoulders are going to have aches, pains, and worse. And it's the same thing with this. If you're in stressful environments over a long period of time, and it can be the stress of a negative workplace, over a long period of time, you can develop the same symptomology. Right? So it's really important to not go, well, you haven't had some big incident. while you could be dealing with this low-level stress for a long period of time, and it can hurt you the same way.
Right. What are some ways that you could, if you're just hanging out with your friends and maybe you notice that somebody's acting a little different, like what are some ways that you could maybe encourage that conversation to at least put yourself out there to say, hey, I'm open to talking with you?
Yeah, so one of the things you can always do is you can always, talk about your own struggles, but in a way that's appropriate. Like, you don't want to, in counseling we always talk about this, like, have somebody go, I'm having a hard time with my partner, and you go, oh, let me tell you about my issues, right? But you can relate a little bit. You can, if you're open and honest about your own mental health issues, sometimes people will confide in you because they see you as a safe place to do that. Myself and my friend Lucas used to have a newsprint publication called The Brand Advocate, and I talked about an 8-month depression I had, like a very serious depression, and the feedback I received from people because they saw it in the paper was really helpful to create some of that. So you don't always have to publish a letter to the editor or anything like that. You can find other ways to bring it up and have it be something that's talked about. Just saying things like, oh, I was talking to my psychologist the other day, and I had therapy three years ago, and I learned something really interesting. That might lead somebody to go, oh, well, who's your therapist, and what does that mean? And or I read this book about this stuff. I don't know if you'd be interested in reading it. Those are all subtle ways to do it. The other thing too, though, is if you feel somebody is going to hurt themselves, ask them. Right? And we sometimes get in our head that if we bring up suicide, it's like it's going to implant the idea in their head. And most of the time what actually ends up happening is the person's relieved somebody else said it. And if they're not suicidal, then they'll say, no, I'm not suicidal, right? Very often. But if they are, they'll, oh, thank God, you brought it up. Okay, yeah, I have been thinking about some things lately. Nobody's ever, if you say, have you ever thought about suicide or hurting yourself? Nobody reads that as, have you thought about suicide? Like this is a thing you should put on your list. That's never been the actual act, but we have this weird fear in our heads that that's actually how people will take it, and then we'll put the idea in their head. Almost never happens that way. Right. So bring it up, right? And there are things you can do too. You can ask people to do a contract. So we do this a lot in therapy, where between now and the next time you see me, you're not going to hurt yourself, and if you feel like you're going to hurt yourself, what's the plan? Right. You're going to call this person. If they're not home, you're going to call this person. If they're not available, you're going to call this person. If they're not available, you're going to call this service. And if that's not available, you're going to call this 24-hour service. Right. And right. And there is something psychologically committing to signing your name on a piece of paper. It has no legal precedent. You're not going to, I broke the contract, I'm going to get sued. No, but it does. I've had people tell me that saved their life signing a self-harm contract, where they've come back a week or two later and been, I just thought about, and I knew I had a plan, and that helped my anxiety, right? Things like that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Marc.
Thank you.
Really appreciate taking the time. We're going to have the details for both of your books, so that if anybody's interested at home and they want to learn more about how they can take care of themselves or potentially pass it on to a loved one, we'll have that below. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for doing this.
And we'll be right back.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.
Looking for great seats to all the action? Rogers Super Sports Pack delivers. With NBA League Pass, get up to 40 out-of-market games every week, all season long. More dunks, more slams, more to love, live in HD. NBA League Pass, part of the Rogers Super Sports Pack. All this for only $35.95 a month. Order through your remote on Channel 431 or call 1-888-ROGERS-1 today.
Your career is too important to just leave to chance. In order to move it to where you want to go, it's going to take some big decisions and some leaps of faith.